Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Resilient Lehigh Valley family. I'm Beth Tomlinson. I'm the Senior Director of Education for the United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley, and also co-founder of Resilient Lehigh Valley. Resilient Lehigh Valley is a community-driven effort to promote hope, healing, and resilience for youth, families, communities, helping professionals by building a trauma-informed and culture-responsive Lehigh Valley. We're doing that through raising awareness on the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, providing training such as today on trauma-informed and culture-responsive practices, both for those in helping professions, but also for parents and community members as well. Supporting organizations and sectors to adopt a trauma-informed approach. Increasing collaboration and really working to break down silos between systems to better support individuals impacted by trauma, supporting communities most impacted by racial and community trauma in the Lehigh Valley, and lastly, by advocating for trauma-informed policies, legislation, and funding at the local, state, and federal levels. So that is who we are, what we're trying to drive in our community, and we invite all of you to join this movement and effort in any ways you're interested and able. And to begin and kind of ground us in today's conversation, we just want to kind of share our group agreements. So we invite everybody to really create a brave space today, to really encourage dialogue and learning, to recognize differences we might hold, and holding each person, ourselves included, accountable to the work of sharing experiences and really being open to others' experiences and perspectives to really get to a place of understanding. And that takes vulnerability, right? And we have to be brave to be vulnerable, but that's really where growth and learning happen. We ask that you get comfortable with discomfort, right? Being vulnerable, right? Can get us a little uncomfortable. And getting out of our comfort zones, right, gets us a little uncomfortable. But again, that's where growth and learning happen. So we ask you to be present, even though we might not resolve or agree on everything today. We invite you to listen, to understand, really be active listeners and engage with empathy. We ask that you have both and thinking framework today, using and instead of but statements, acknowledging that different perspectives can be true at the same time. And we ask that you honor confidentiality. So take away what is learned today and leave behind what is shared. We ask you to speak your own truth, use I statements instead of we, and avoid making you statements because that can get others feeling defensive. And lastly, we ask and invite you to practice some self-care, right? Be mindful. Check in with your body to see how you're feeling. Feel free to turn off your screen. I see many of you have already done so, although we love seeing your faces. Get a drink of water, stand up and stretch, as your body needs to, right? So really be mindful of practicing self-care throughout our time together. And with that said, I really want to first thank Crayola for sponsoring today's training on compassion resilience. And also, a little preview, Crayola is also sponsoring our follow-up training in compassion resilience, where we're going to go a lot deeper than we're able to today with our 2-hour time frame. In August, and you'll all get an invitation to that as well. In August, we're going to have a much deeper train the trainer workshop series in compassion resilience, how to make best use of this compassion resilience toolkit that's available for everyone, and really work to create an organizational and school culture that embraces and builds and fosters and supports compassion resilience. So that's a little preview. That's coming up in August. And you all will be invited to that. And Crayola is sponsoring that as well. So very generous of Crayola to sponsor that. And we're very grateful. And today we have Sherry Sturman, Director of Education with Crayola, right? So I want to welcome Sherry to present, and she'll introduce our trainers as well. Sherry helps educators and community leaders build creative capacity. She provides professional learning courses and podcasts on creative leadership, culturally responsive teaching, and the power of art to reverse stereotypes. Sherry hosts the new Crayola monthly online programs, including Creative Spa for Educators. That sounds fun. The Art of Learning, and Read Along, Draw Along, where she interviews authors, illustrators, astronauts, and actors. And that sounds super cool. Sherry is excited about launching Crayola Creativity Week, a global celebration of children's creativity that this year will be co-sponsored by NASA and feature a host of celebrity actors, visual artists, and musicians who will help kids see the connections between creativity and social-emotional learning. When she's not tethered to her computer, Sherry is brewing kombucha and inventing new recipes for sourdough bread. And you can follow Sherry on Twitter at Sherry Sturman. Take it away, Sherry.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to Resilient Lehigh Valley's Compassionate Resilience Training. I'm thrilled that Crayola is a sponsor of this important event and that we share United Way's commitment to social and emotional learning. So in these opening remarks, I want to start by thinking about the adults who work with kids and youth. We spend so much time thinking about others that sometimes we forget to reflect on our own needs. So in this next few minutes, we're going to do a warm-up experience and really thinking about how you engage in self-care and how you restore your creative energy. We're going to be asking you, what do you see within, what do you say to and do for yourself? So I'd like to start with a quote that you're probably familiar with. Remember the great work that the late researcher Yuri Bronfenbrenner did on child development. But let's flip Yuri Bronfenbrenner's famous quote where he talks about every child needing someone who's wildly crazy about them. And in this flip version, be thinking about a statement where others are helping to care for, heal, educate, and support you. You need others. Who can you count on to listen to you, support you, and be unconditionally crazy about you? So humans crave connections. You know, every person does need at least one other person who's irrationally crazy about them. So reflect on that quote. And if you could pick up a piece of scrap paper and a marker, or if you prefer to type in the chat, list at least one person who is that person for you, who is unconditionally supportive of you. What's fascinating here is, that research shows our need to belong is a fundamental human need, only slightly below the essential physiological needs that we have for water, food, and physical safety. So please just take a moment and jot down at least one person who is unconditionally crazy about you. So you know the expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually do something about it by being compassionate to ourselves and focusing on what energizes and rejuvenates us. So first, let's think about this wisdom that's here on the T tag from art therapist Ella Dufresne. She says, the more that we uplift ourselves into the world, the more that we can allow our light to shine and uplift others. So it's super important to be thinking about what makes our light shine. We're going to ask you to visualize what sustains your energy and what motivates you. So please grab some scrap paper and a marker and sketch some symbols and words that represent what restores your energy, what revitalizes your creativity, and what rekindles your motivation. In the opening, Beth mentioned that we do a creative spa for educators, and just last night we did one on forest bathing, on forest therapy. If anybody missed it, you can catch it on the Crayola Education Facebook page by going to the videos tab. But this amazing forest therapist talked to us about how being in the woods, being present in the presence of trees, actually physiologically calms our heart rate, brings our blood pressure down, and helps our body build immunotherapy protection cells. It's just amazing. So, maybe you're thinking of some trees to sketch on your scrap paper. But if you're staring at a blank page and wondering what you could sketch or what words you could write that talk about restoring your energy and revitalizing you, here are some prompts that might get you started. If you want to finish these sentences, the most comforting memory that I have is, I don't do enough of this, but I enjoy. If I could lighten up a bit, I would let myself. If I wasn't worried about being embarrassed, I would try. I'm my own worst critic. I need to embrace my. Taking time for myself feels like I'm afraid that if I start dreaming, if it didn't sound crazy, I would give myself. My most cheer me up music is. Or maybe you want to answer, no amount of money could buy this for me, and this is what I need. So take a few moments, because we're going to ask people to share in just a minute. Good, we've got some things here in the chat. Excellent. Sorry, I wasn't able to see that before. So if you would like to hold up your sketch, unmute yourself and hold it up to the camera, or if you'd like to make some comments in the chat. Oh, good. I'm starting to see some of these come through the chat. You don't get out enough bike riding or playing with your dog. Awesome. Birds, chimes, leaves rustling. Oh, a lovely memory, being in your grandparents' farm. Laughter. Thank you, Denise. They say laughter is medicine. I bet it's right up there with the trees. Oh, thank you, Rachel. If you weren't worried about being embarrassed, what would you do? A lot more things. Tell us some. Does this feel different to you to spend a few minutes thinking about what you need? So, and the importance of thinking about how you fill your cup and then sharing it with others is it really keeps us from feeling like we're facing the unknown alone. And we see a lot of patterns in your answers, and we can all relate to the comments that you're making. So thank you. We are really thrilled to have our two keynote speakers here with us today, Carla Benway and Shauna Williams. Carla is the Chief Strategy Officer at Youth Advocate Programs, which is a national nonprofit that works to keep young people safely home as an alternative to out-of-home placement or violence. Carla currently oversees training, model development, and implementation, as well as strategic initiatives at Youth Advocate Program. She is deeply committed to and involved with advancing equity and inclusion and creating trauma response healing center communities. Carla is an executive member of Resilient Lehigh Valley and a deacon at her church, where she also sings on the worship team. She and her husband have 2 kids and 2 furry kids, her dogs, but it sounds like Carla is always pushing for more of the furry friends. This time of year, she enjoys motorcycle rides, shopping at farmers markets, throwing quinotes, and reading. Our second speaker, Shauna Williams, works with Resilient Lehigh Valley to provide outreach to local community groups, faith groups, agencies, and parent groups. Shauna shares Resilient Lehigh Valley's message throughout our community at events and partnerships with mission-aligned committees and coalitions. When Shauna isn't working on spreading Resilient Lehigh Valley's message of hope and healing, she enjoys spending time with her husband and 2 kids, hiking, on beach trips, doing yoga, and poetry, which are the activities that bring her joy, and I hope we saw some of those filling up her cup in her sketch. Welcome, Carla and Shauna, and we're excited to hear your insights today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. So, as I think the last 2 years have taught us all to be very adaptable and flexible. And a little announcement change in trainers. Shauna came down with a little bit of laryngitis this week, and we were really hoping her voice would recover by today, but she's still a little squeaky. So Shauna is with us in body and spirit, but not voice. So I will be filling in and taking over her slides for today. And the Train the Trainer workshop series that I talked about earlier, Carla and Shauna will both be providing those trainings. So just trying to lock in the August dates for that. But it'll be a Tuesday and a Thursday in the same week in August. So be on the lookout for an invitation for that. And we're looking to invite 3 to 5 member teams from schools and agencies to attend that Train the Trainer together, so folks can get really fully steeped in this resource and then operationalize it within their schools and agencies to really help their team members and their staff really build compassion resilience and prevent and lessen compassion fatigue and burnout. So that being said, Shauna, Carla, and I were all part of a Lehigh Valley team that got trained as trainers in the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. And this Compassion Resilience Toolkit is an amazing resource. It is free for everybody. So you can all, after this train today, go look it up, the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. It was developed by Wise and Rogers Behavioral Health. There's a toolkit for parents and caregivers. There's one for educators, and there's one for health and human service providers. The intent of this toolkit, it was really designed for helpers, whether you're formal or informal helpers, whether you're professional or parent helpers. To be a helper, right? It means, and Sherry spoke to this so beautifully, we're pouring from our emotional cup. Right. And to be able to pour, right, we need our cups being filled to be able to do that. Right. Can't pour from an empty vessel. And particularly with helpers, professional helpers, right, we're pouring every day, all day, both for our students or our clients, but even our peers and colleagues. Right. So how do we kind of keep that cup from getting empty? How do we keep others' cups from getting empty? And how do we really maintain that balance, right? So we're giving and we're being supported, and we're giving and we're being supported to really maintain that compassion resilience. So we're connecting with the joy of helping, which is what brought us to helping. And we're really preventing, lessening, avoiding some of the negative side effects of being a helper, like that compassion fatigue and burnout that we're going to talk about today. So this toolkit is robust. It's designed to be have everything available in it for anybody to facilitate some meetings, some trainings on it. And it is there's a lot in there, which is why it's a benefit to get trained as a trainer in the toolkit, so you really can navigate this amazing resource easily and put plans in place to operationalize it in your school or agency. So today is some powerful learning on compassion resilience to really fill your cup, give you some ideas of what is inside this what compassion resilience is, what is inside this toolkit, and then we invite you to come back in August to really have a much deeper training in this toolkit, so that you can really begin fostering this in your agencies. So a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to define some terms. We're going to talk about systems drivers, both of compassion fatigue and compassion resilience. We're going to talk through some strategies to build compassion resilience, right? And we're going to focus on building your own wellness. And Sherry spoke to that so beautifully with really lots of different ways we can fill our cup. So, compassion. Compassion is the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness and we take action in the face of suffering. So I think we all love Brene Brown. If I could just have her voice in my head all the time, I think I would be a much happier person. Probably a better social worker and a better parent to boot. But she really talks about compassion as an active practice, right? There's an action involved in compassion. For those of us, whether we're formal or informal helpers, right, we are often tasked with acting from a place of compassion, right? Holding others' suffering, feeling the weight of that suffering, and taking action to support that individual. And that might be, occasional, right? Depending on the type of work that we have and the type of population we work with. That might be every hour, every day, over and over and over again, really being exposed to others' suffering, holding it and acting on it from a place of compassion. And that can take a toll. Moving into compassion resilience. Compassion resilience is the ability to maintain our physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being while responding compassionately to people who are suffering. All right, think of compassion resilience as this reservoir of well-being that we can draw on and tap into in difficult days and difficult situations, right, to maintain our own well-being while helping with others. And I'm sure we can all reflect on times when we have been that empathic individual and really helping with the connection and what that feels like, how it feels to carry somebody else's suffering or connect inside us, right, a similar feeling to what that person is experiencing. Or if we can't connect with that feeling because we haven't maybe had that experience, right? Getting something close to it and feeling along with someone, right? That can be emotionally draining. So if we do that as a profession, right, and we work with highly traumatized populations, we're at risk for compassion fatigue, feelings of depression, sadness, exhaustion, anxiety, fear, right? Irritability that may be experienced by people who are helpers, whether it's professional or you're doing it as a profession or is informal role that you play as a helper, right? Which can lead to secondary trauma and burnout. So burnout refers to the physical or emotional exhaustion and feelings of ineffectiveness, usually a result of prolonged stress related to very high workload, non-supportive work environments, and our feeling that our efforts make no difference. When we hear the traumatic stories and are witness to others' pain, fear, painful situations and stories, we can feel intense emotions, right, ourselves, even if we're not the direct victim of the traumatizing event. And our desire to help and connect and care for those who are suffering allows us to feel what they're feeling and can leave us at risk of carrying those emotions and experiences home with us at the end of the day. Right? Studies show that between 6 and 26% of therapists working with traumatized populations and up to 50% of child welfare workers are at high risk for secondary traumatic stress. Anyone working with traumatized populations and hearing their stories is at risk. The risk appears to be higher for women and people who are highly empathetic by nature, which is probably many of us or all of us on this training today, or have unresolved personal trauma themselves. The risk is also higher for helping professionals with high caseloads of traumatized clients, or socially or organizationally isolated, or feel professionally compromised due to inadequate training. Symptoms of secondary traumatic stress mirror those of PTSD, intrusion, avoidance, negative cognitions and mood, hyperarousal, hopelessness, sleeplessness, numbing, anger, fear, right? So being with others who are in pain, who are suffering, who've experienced trauma, us connecting takes a toll on us, right? That can lead to burnout, fatigue, right? Carrying some secondary traumatic stress, right? That mirrors PTSD. So whether we have had these experiences, these direct traumatic experiences that our clients or students have had, right? Connecting with them and feeling their pain along with them while we support them, right? We carry on that secondary traumatic stress load ourselves, right? That can result and mirror things like PTSD. So as being a helper, again, whether you're a professional helper or a helper in your personal life, can take a toll. And vicarious trauma is when these changes really affect our inner experiences, our sense of ourself, our sense of others, our sense of the world, due to empathic engagements with a traumatized person. So this is a profound shift in our worldview that comes with repeated exposure to secondary trauma. So there is a toll to being a helper, right? And there are strategies and resources and things we can do, right, to minimize that, to lessen that, and to build up our resilience. And now I'm going to pass over to Carla, who's going to talk through the drivers of compassion fatigue and stages of compassion fatigue.
Thanks, Beth. Appreciate you leading us through that. So just being candid and vulnerable, I'm just going to say I am not at my home office today. I am actually working in our YAP Philadelphia office. I've been training some staff the past few days, so I'm feeling a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I just ask you to give me a little grace if I seem a little bit disjointed. But what I'm going to be talking about next is what compassion fatigue can look like. This is not necessarily a linear process. You can experience lots of these different points on the path to compassion fatigue at any given week. You can move through them kind of rapidly. You can be, just experiencing one and kind of be in that space for quite a while. But again, it's not necessarily a progression. It's not necessarily linear. But as we talk about what each of these different stops and in this pathway might look like, I encourage you to reflect back on the past few years, thinking about the pandemic, and the 2 years that we've kind of lived in this space, and thinking about even in this present moment, do you recognize yourself in any of these? Do you recognize any people that you work with, any of your teammates? And just, try to tune into that. If or as something resonates with you, I invite you to go ahead and drop that in the chat and to share it with others. All right. Ooh, see, this is not my laptop and I don't know what just happened. There we go. Hopefully you see zealot. Okay. So when we're in the zealot phase, what that can look like is a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a can-do kind of attitude. We are ready to problem solve. We can feel, as it says, committed, involved, and available. I mean, this was me for probably the first 4 months of the pandemic, right? Like many of you, we had to pivot very rapidly and unexpectedly from providing face-to-face kind of in-person services to trying to meet the needs of individuals remotely. And to learn what that even looks like. How do you engage people through a video? How do you support your staff? Like, there was just so many things that we needed to problem solve that I think in those first, 4 to, I don't know, however many months, like I was very much in that zealot phase, pouring in long hours and just really, really challenging myself to like figure it out. We got to do this, right? Another stop on the pathway to compassion fatigue is irritability. And I definitely hit this a couple times during the pandemic. And it's at that point where, we start to notice the imperfections in ourselves, in other people, in systems. We have a little, like, just this constant state. I love where it says they're just like simmering anger. Like, it was just constantly kind of in the backdrop for me. It was my baseline for a while. I just felt very irritable. And it was harder for me to kind of find that compassion. I had to put a little more effort into it. But yeah, you can be thinking more negative things, definitely more distracted, less creative, more likely to make a mistake. And the humor can kind of change its tone a little bit and become a bit more strained and a bit more dark. Oh, thank you for loving the cats. I had a fun time making these slides, I do have to say. It was kind of cathartic for me. All right. Another potential pathway in that compassion fatigue cycle is withdrawal. And I think I hit this in, honestly, the beginning of 2022, because I just kept telling myself I was creating these arbitrary timelines that, like, once 2022 hits, like, things are going to be better, right? But at the end of 2021, over the holidays, like, my whole family got hit with COVID. My sister's family had it. My mom was out of town visiting my grandma, for the holidays. Like, I was just really over it, and I think that made me feel like just exhausted. I was just exhausted from just this whole context of, trying to survive and care for myself while caring for others and trying to perform and, just keep that optimism and enthusiasm. But it was like 2 years and I was definitely over it. So, it can look like withdrawal. It can look like, I don't have the energy to turn my camera on because, candidly, I was still in my pajamas for this Zoom because I'm really struggling. So, this is the point where, you really start to notice that, who yourself or someone else is just really struggling. And then the most concerning point in the compassion fatigue pathway to me is the zombie, right? Because that is when we really have no tolerance or compassion for anyone at that point. We don't have it for ourselves, and we certainly don't have it for others. We can feel very angry, or we can feel absolutely nothing at all. Like, there's just nothing, it's that sense of complete numbness. We have no confidence in anyone else to be able to do anything. We feel like we're the only ones that are competent and can get anything done. And in terms of how it might manifest in us, we might be having trouble sleeping. Our brains just don't shut off because we're just constantly thinking about whatever our worries are. We can have a sense that we're being unfairly treated or judged, that people don't understand us. And that, people maybe don't even deserve us, right? So the zombie is definitely like a red flag point in the pathway, and it's usually pretty evident. So not a hard one to notice. But the important thing to recall is that, at any point in this cycle, we have the opportunity to recognize what's happening in ourselves or in a colleague or someone we care about. And, gently bring it to our attention, like gently explore that and take intentional steps to identify like what the cause of that is and what strategies we can implement that can help us to better cope with what we're feeling so that we can refill that cup and be our best selves or a better version of ourselves than we feel in that moment. All right, welcome back. Hopefully everybody had time to actually share this time, right? So I'm going to take us back out to the PowerPoint, and I think Beth is going to be leading us in our next section.
Thanks, Carla. I don't know about everybody else, but my group, we had a really interesting, honest, heartfelt conversation around where we saw ourselves in the cast. A lot of zealots in our group, myself included. I default to zealot, and it takes a toll, right? It really does. So I appreciate all the conversations and the honest sharing, the vulnerability, right, in the breakout rooms. So kind of from here on out, we're going to talk about a few different things, right? Now we're going to talk about self-compassion, the importance of it. And I just want to kind of put this in the framework of self-compassion, right, can be about what we individually do for ourselves, right? Which is kind of that self-care space that we can do. But I also want you to kind of be open to and have that framework of organizationally, right? How can we support self-compassion, right? There's a lot we can be doing as supervisors, as department leads, as organizational leadership to really foster and promote acts of self-compassion and a climate and culture that fosters self-compassion, respects it, encourages it, coaches folks on it, reminds folks on it. So really thinking through both what I can do individually for myself, but also really having that kind of organizational kind of systems lens of fostering self-compassion too. So when we think of self-compassion, it's pretty simple. Extending the same kindness to yourself as you would to others. I don't know everybody on this training today, but I recognize a lot of names, right? And I'm going to make some assumptions that everybody on this training is likely a professional helper and probably also a helper in their personal lives as well. High empathy, kind, caring, dedicated, compassionate individuals that go above and beyond to help others. Right? That is what you put of yourself into helping other people. Do you put that same energy right into yourself? I know I don't. I am terrible. I'm just going to fully be transparent. I am terrible with self-compassion, right? I hyper criticize, I could have done more. I could have done better. I could have done right? I struggle with self-compassion myself. And it's kind of one thing I've learned through COVID is I struggle with it. And I need to focus my energies on it. Because if I were outside of myself, talking to myself, I'd be way nicer and way more supportive and way more forgiving than sometimes my inner voice is. So for me, I got to work on it. So like, how do we operationalize self-compassion, right? There are three key components, really. Self-kindness, right? Being mindful, right? Connecting into ourselves, and common humanity. So I just want to acknowledge a bit about common humanity before we move on to the next slide. We all are imperfect beings, right? We all make mistakes. There is not a perfect being here, right? We all struggle sometimes. We all have bad days. We all have moments and days when we are not our best selves. Mm-hmm. Right? We all suffer. We all struggle with pain and suffering of different kinds, different types, right? We all have that. We all have that. So with that, right, an acknowledgement that it's okay to have a bad day, right? We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. That's okay because everybody makes mistakes, right? We're going to have rough, dark moments, and we're not alone in that. Right. So just acknowledging that and being open to that, right? Our pain, our struggle, our challenges, our imperfections are shared by everyone on this planet. Right. And there's, I think there's some grace and forgiveness built into having that framework. So that's one thing that really helps me focus and actually feel like it's okay to focus and build my own self-compassion. So being kind to ourselves first. Mindfulness. I feel like after the last 2 years, we've heard a lot about mindfulness. We talked a lot about it. I'm assuming most folks are pretty familiar with this already. But really mindful is really not being mindful, crazy, full mind, but actually, right, connecting in, using ourselves to connect in on the present, right? What is our body feeling? What is our body telling us? Take a moment in that space, put words to it, give attention to it, and act on it, right? Do I need to stand and walk? Do I need to focus on my breathing? Do I need a little bit of outside time just to see the green, the nature that Sherry was talking about, and the power and the healing of that? Do I need to listen to some music, right, to pump me up or chill me out? Right? Being mindful and practicing mindfulness on the daily, right? Really, really helpful. Kind of lets us know when our cup might be getting towards empty. Self-kindness, right? Being your own best friend, right? Being supportive, understanding towards others and ourselves, right? If somebody else was struggling as you were struggling, right? You would be supportive, you'd help them, you'd lift them up, you'd validate them, right? Doing that same for yourself. And really, again, that common humanity and connectedness. We are not alone. We are not alone in our imperfections. We are not alone in our bad days, in our imperfect moments, right? That's just part of being human. And we need to have grace and forgiveness for ourselves. All right, why should we practice self-compassion? It seems like we shouldn't need to define this, right? But I don't know. I won't make assumptions. I am terrible at self-compassion. I am terrible at it. I have to commit to it. I have to remind myself. I have to catch myself, right? And focus on it. So I know I have to really be intentional with practicing self-compassion. And when I do, I know I'm happier, less stressed, and feel more resilient. And the more we practice self-compassion, the happier, the less stressed, and the more resilient we become. So it really is a really powerful tool, and a powerful tool to encourage in others as well, right? So some daily steps for building self-compassion. Consider what you're grateful for, right? There's a lot of research around acts of gratitude and the power of gratitude, right? Because it gets kind of gets to that both and thinking that we talked about in our group agreements, right? If we're always focused on the negative, what is not working, the pain and suffering, with those that we're working with, the way the systems aren't working, society and what's going wrong with society, climate, right? Our own personal lives. If we're always focused on what's not working, that can actually get us into a really negative mindset that actually affects our emotional, mental health, physical health, right? So actually actively taking moments to reflect on what we are grateful for, what is working, what makes us happy, right? What is working well in our lives, personal and professional, right? That both and. All these other things can be true. The negatives can also be true, but there's also a lot of positives and things we should be grateful for. And just switching that mindset to also acknowledging what we're grateful for, what is working, resets that positive lens. Take time to do what you love because you're important. Your wellness is important, right? So it's really important to take time to do what you love, as she was talking about so beautifully earlier. In moments of stress, take a deep breath and allow yourself to find comfort and acceptance, right? Being mindful, turning negative self-talk into a positive encouragement, and first catching yourself, ooh, is this negative self-talk? That's what I have to do for myself, right? And then being my best friend to myself, right? What would I say to a friend who's thinking this? And that helps me with a positive self-talk. And really focusing on self-awareness. Again, being mindful of what you are feeling, Where are you carrying that stress in your neck, in your chest? I know for me, as the work day goes on or the work week, my shoulders kind of go up to like my ears. Like I get all my stress and tension here, right? And now I know I've recognized that. So when I feel that tension, right, that's my cue to be like, okay, I need to breathe. I need to relax, maybe rub my shoulders, go for a walk outside. So lots of concrete things that we can do for ourselves to build self-compassion. And, right, these are also things we can encourage others to do. These are also things we can build into our teams, our departments, our organizational culture. So we're creating an environment that fosters and feeds acts of self-compassion. Happiness stems from loving ourselves and our lives exactly as they are, knowing that joy and pain, strength and weakness, glory and failure are essential to the full human experience, right? So developing practices of self-compassion is really hard work. I mean, maybe it's not hard work for all of you. I know it's really hard work for me, and it's personal work. So I really encourage everyone to have compassion for yourself during this process. It has been, right, as helpers, pre-COVID, as helpers, right? It takes a toll, as we've talked about. But being a helper and being a helper through the last 2 years, right? In addition to our own experience with the COVID and the pandemic and economic and housing and crisis after crisis, political upheaval, racial upheaval, all of this, it's emotionally been a lot. It's been a lot for all of us. So we really need to be taking the time and building that practice and building that muscle of self-compassion and encouraging it in others, and really within whatever role we have in our agencies and schools, fostering that practice within our organizational culture as well. Very important. So before I turn it back to Carla, right, as one way to operationalize self-compassion, you can write in the chat. A lot of you already are, and I love it. Or write down on your own notes, or you can practice this later, right? Three things that you're grateful for, and why they bring you joy, right? And now I'll kick it back to Carla.
So we thought one of the most powerful exercises that we went through as we did the training on compassion resilience was spending some time thinking about, from an organizational perspective, right? What are some of the drivers of compassion fatigue? And then also thinking about what are some of the drivers of compassion resilience from within our workplace. So if folks could start sharing some ideas, right? So a driver, and I'll start just because I think it's sometimes helpful, but one of the drivers of compassion fatigue that we hear about at YAP, at Youth Advocate Programs, is paperwork. Like that is very time consuming and can be really stressful for our staff. Another thing that we sometimes hear is a driver of fatigue is caseloads. I don't know if any other organization is struggling right now with recruitment and retention of staff, but in some of our programs, we have heard that staffing shortages have led to some of our staff having to work with more young people and families than we think is best practice, right? And that can absolutely contribute to compassion fatigue. So do folks have any other ideas or thoughts about what might contribute or be a driver of compassion fatigue?
So we have paperwork, caseload, constant interruptions. In the chat, we have negative attitudes around you. Another is meeting. I feel that. Unclear expectations.
Oh yeah, long shifts and swing shifts, yeah. the 24/7 is a real thing. I just want to also respond that resonates with me, because in this era of technology, it can feel like we just always have to be on and always have to be available.
We are in this culture today where everything's like, a question, you need that response. And usually the response would always be better with a little bit of thought put into it. Yeah, really appreciate that. So what are some things that we have at work, right? That really help to drive resilience instead of driving the fatigue? What actually fills our cup, right? And makes us feel supported and really engaged in our work. Right, cooperation, team support, right, makes all the difference in a stressful world. Flexibility, check-ins, lots of good communication, right? Taking that extra time for yourself. Trust, compassion, knowing it's okay to laugh. Love that. Atmosphere of mutual respect and a recognition of each other's strengths. Team retreats away from the office. These are all great ideas. Exercise. Good communication, team effort, compassion, respect, praise, and recognition.
I think recognizing that it's okay to disagree is a driver.
Yeah. Starting all meetings with mindfulness. Had a system for tap out when as a team we could get away for a moment. I know a lot of our trauma-informed schools use that. Tap in, tap out. Very helpful. So Carla, you are doing a phenomenal job of capturing all these. Right, so far drivers of resilience, we have flexibility, empathy, time, turning off notifications for a time, great team support, cooperation, check-ins, taking time for yourself, compassion for yourself and others, trust, right? That others trust us to do our work, that we have trust in others, mutual respect, recognition of each other's strengths, right? Team retreats to get away and do work and create and collaborate together. Good communication, praise and recognition, right? Healthy conflict, recognize it's okay to disagree, celebrating our successes, right? Having that, tap in, tap out system when we really do need a moment, and really building mindfulness into our culture and starting meetings with that. Love all of these ideas. Right, so if we think of the drivers of fatigue and we go back to that first column, right, we have paperwork, we have caseload, we have constant interruptions, unclear expectations, email and work phones. So it's now everything's 24/7. We need to be, on point with work. Meeting mania, overly critical administration, gossip, not feeling supported, long shifts, swing shifts, lack of flexibility, not feeling valued, pressure from technology, being your own secretary, lack of patience. Which of these do we have control over or a good degree of control over? Right? What does our leadership have control over? Maybe cross out the ones that we have control over and do a different notation of the ones our leadership has control over. So you guys can put it in the chat, your thoughts, or you can go off mute. All right, so we're going to strike through what we have no control over. And we're going to mark with an L what leadership has control over. Right, and what we do have control over, right, we'll leave that blank for Ashi. Right, so let's see, through the notes so far, we can choose whether or not to get caught up in the gossip, Yeah, like that is our choice, right? We have control over that. We can talk to our colleagues around that. We can just walk out of the room, right? We have a control over lack of patience when it's us, right? Lacking the patience in others. Might not have control if it's others lacking the patience with us or colleagues. We have responsibility to communicate, right? That's in everybody, right? We can always be clear in our communication. We can always improve our communication. We can always ask for clarifying questions if we really didn't understand, right, what's coming to us. We have some control over how we value ourselves and value others. Maybe not as much control over how supervisors or leadership values us or colleagues value us, but we have some control over how we value others and how we value ourselves. A 24/7 email, turn it off after a certain time, right? So we can choose to say, hey, I'm not checking work emails in the evening or on weekends. Now, depending on our work environment or our supervisor or our leadership team, right? There might be a consequence to that, turning it off and not responding in the evening or weekends, depending. But that's certainly some control we have over that. We can choose to source our value from within. Most definitely. We can make some life choices like sleep exercise, having meditation, things like that, really focusing on that mindfulness. Even with the interruptions and technology, right? We can put on a do not disturb sign on our office. There's some things with email we can even do to let folks know that, we're not available. So we have some control over the interruptions. We can advocate for ourselves in some of these items like paperwork, caseload meetings, may or may not change, but it gives us some control by doing something, by advocating. We can control communicating our needs. We're going to talk about that in a minute too. All right, great point, Carl. Is it helpful to think about what we can and can't control? How much time should we spend in supervision and staff meetings on what we can't control? Right, so what does leadership have control over? You can go off mute, chime in on that. You can put it in the chat. Caseloads. Thanks, Shelley. What about the paperwork? Depending on the kind of job we have, some of that paperwork might be state mandated, insurance mandated. Some of it might just be organizationally mandated. Being overly critical. Thanks, James. All right, leadership can establish a culture of mutual respect and recognizing strengths. Thanks for that, Nadine. Leadership controls transparency. Thanks, Anu. Definitely. So I think what we can see from that, right, there are actual actions, there are things that drive compassion fatigue, right? And we talked through a whole lot of them, and probably if we had more time, we would keep adding to that list, right? So there are things that drive that compassion fatigue, right, that brings us down, right, causes burnout. And there are things that drive resilience, right? So we want to push in more of those things that drive resilience, right? And build some strategies, some practices around things to minimize or reduce those drivers of compassion fatigue.
Part of what they talked about in going through this exercise was just reflecting, is it helpful to claim all the things that kind of contribute to fatigue versus resilience. And then as a team, like with your department, with your organization, however you're structured, to engage in that process we just went through, because there are some things that we can control and there are things that we can't. And although it's good to identify things we can't control, they're a part of our lives, they're going to cause stress, right? So we don't want to suppress it. We don't want to ignore it. But we also don't want to get thought stuck and put a lot of our emotional energy into the things that we just don't have control over. We have more of an impact on our own wellness and on our own resilience when we put our energy into the things that we have some or all control over, and just work on that as a team. And then the things that we don't have control over, someone said in the chat, that's an opportunity to like lift that up to leadership. And to hopefully ask them to take a look at some of those items and to commit to working on them in the next year. And I don't know what you said about boundaries yet, Beth, but boundaries are not only important for the safety and well-being of our students or of the program participants that we're working with, but boundaries are important for us as well as workers. For those zealots out there like Beth and like I can be, sometimes being able to say no is really important, right? Like being able to say no because I'm saying yes to some other things and that those things need to be the priority is super important. And then for some of us, being a little more flexible and being willing to jump in and help someone out who's on our team when they're struggling. It may not be my job, but because I care about you as my teammate, I'm going to be a little fluid in my boundary and I'm going to help you out because you need that help and I care about you and I don't want you to burn out. So that is just another thing for us to be mindful for when we're talking, or mindful of as we're talking about boundaries. So Beth, I'm sorry if you already said that, and if you were about to and didn't, I'm sorry that I stole your thunder.
You are welcome to steal my thunder any day. Thank you, Carla. And so happy to have you back. So as we were thinking about those drivers, we could begin, you guys were sharing in the chat, right? Some actions we can do, right? And a lot of that was around, right? We weren't saying boundaries necessarily, but that's what you were speaking to, right? Boundaries are important for our own well-being and also well-being of those around us, right? Us establishing our boundaries helps us remain professional, helps us keep our cup, full, or certainly not empty. It protects our relationship with our clients. It maintains a level of self-awareness and regulation to help protect against compassion fatigue, right? And as we talk through boundaries, I want us to be mindful of, the importance of setting our own personal boundaries, right? These are acts that we can take for ourselves. And a lot of you mentioned in the chat, you can advocate for what your needs are. You can vocalize your needs. You can talk with your supervisor. You can talk with your building or agency leadership to establish those boundaries, right? So there's the role that you can do for yourself, but you can also honor someone else's boundaries, right? And that helps fill their cup, right? That helps build their compassion resilience. And if you're in any leadership position in your school or agency, you can create a culture, right, about boundary setting and not only boundary setting and communicating, but also respecting people's boundaries and making that part of your organizational culture, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Right. So boundaries, I love this quote. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Think about that. Reflect on that. Right. Setting boundaries is an act of self-compassion. Honoring someone else's boundaries is an act of compassion and empathy. All right. So if we think about types of boundaries, right, permeable, rigid, flexible. Permeable is a boundary set, but there's very little reinforcement of that boundary, right? For example, like caseloads or workload, right? It might say, okay, yes, your job description says you're going to have 35 clients at a time or something, right? But this person's on maternity leave, position is full. Oh, but there's a waiting list, and so now your caseload's 50, right? So, for example. Rigid boundaries are those boundaries that you reinforce at all costs, right? But it might be so rigid that you're creating distance between others and you're not supporting others' needs or being a good team member, right? And you're not open to any flexibility or negotiation or redefining of those boundaries. Flexible boundary, right, is one that is firm and clear, right? So you're vocalizing it, you're asking others to respect it, and yet open to new ideas and resources when needed, right? So if a new project is given to you, for example, or a new ask, you might ask questions about it to make sure you really understand it and it fits or doesn't fit, and kind of negotiate what that boundary is in that given situation. All right, tips for setting compassionate boundaries, and we'll kind of go through this quickly. Know what you want to say, right? What do you want to say yes to in your life? What is important to you? Be proactive, right? Be vocal, say it, right? No one can guess what your boundaries are, right? You have to establish them. You have to communicate them and reinforce by pointing out the violations in the moment, right? Having a boundary, like, for example, I, especially with COVID and everything virtual, my calendar got filled with back-to-back meetings, and I went like 2 months without having lunch, right? Because there was meetings back-to-back, right? So no potty break, no lunches, literally 9 to 6 meetings back-to-back. Not good for my health, not good for my mental health, right? So I said, okay, right, I need a lunch, right? And I actually scheduled a half-hour lunch break on my calendar every day. And then what started happening is people started scheduling over my lunch break. Oh, but this is the only time on your calendar, right? And I had a choice. Do I let it go? Do I honor it? Do I say, hey, nope, I need this? And had to negotiate that and kind of reset those boundaries, right? So just having it and saying it without reinforcing it, right? That's not a boundary. Give explanations that are specific and relevant to the person, right? So folks know the boundary and where there's negotiation around resetting boundaries, and make sure to back up your boundary with action. If you give in, you invite people to ignore your needs. All right, so some simple tips for creating boundaries. I have the right, so this gets to self-kindness. I have the right to ask for, right? Privacy, information, a lunch break, right? To protect my time and energy, it is okay too. People may not humiliate me in front of others, go through my desk, take my personal things, read through my case files without my permission, right? So start thinking of what some of your personal boundaries are and how it feels when they're violated. Compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment, right? Resentment is a driver of fatigue, right? Saying yes and meaning it and being okay with it, right, is one of those drivers of resilience. So setting boundaries are really, really important.
Okay, thank you, Beth. But one of the things we just want to emphasize is that for each of these sections, like so boundaries and that compassion resilience toolkit, there's a number of activities and handouts that kind of accompany that you can take back to your local office, just like there is on expectations, which is what we're going to talk about next, and everything else that we're talking about. So I just want to keep reflecting back on that because I know we're going really fast just due to time. So the expectations, like that came up right in our conversation about drivers of compassion fatigue. If we aren't clear on what is expected of us, if we don't know what's expected of us, if our expectations are different than perhaps our supervisor's expectations, we can have problems. Like we can begin to feel, as Beth said, resentment and or shame. And we're going to talk about that because if expectations are unclear, if they're unrealistic, if we're like throwing shoulds on ourselves, like I shouldn't have problems with my technology when I'm doing a training, or any other type of should, like those really do lead to feelings of either shame. That's when we internalize something about when expectations aren't being met, or it leads to resentment. And that's when we kind of externalize any type of feeling about when expectations are not being met. So if we go to the next slide, it's really important for us to have dialogue within our teams. And that's with our supervisors, as well as those that we might supervise, even our peers and our teammates, to really reflect on, do folks know what is expected of them? And how do we know, what's expected of them? And making sure that we're regularly engaging in those conversations so that we're all operating from the same page and from the same values. I'm just looking at the chat. Okay, sorry, I was getting a little distracted by that. But in our team, in our department, we actually went through an exercise where we identified some values to us. So like connection was one of our values, right? So we then went about operationalizing, well, what does connection look like? Like, what do we expect of each other in terms of connection? So every time we start a meeting, we start with a check-in. That is like an expectation that we have. Another expectation is we assume good intentions, because you guys know how it is, especially like with technology. You're reading an email or you're reading a text message, and sometimes you're just like, yo, is she giving me a little attitude? But we assume good intentions, and if we're not clear, we reach out and we ask for clarification. So going through an exercise like this with yourself or with your team can be very helpful and contribute to that compassion resilience instead of compassion fatigue. And then culture is another thing that really contributes to whether we have a workplace environment that is one supporting compassion fatigue, or that's really building compassion resilience. And a number of you identified when we were looking at those system drivers, behaviors, things in our culture that can do one or the other, right? So like gossip, if you have a culture where there's a lot of gossip, you're going to have a lot of frustration, burnout, fatigue. People just are not going to want to participate and be a part of that culture, right? Like it's very disengaging. It's very draining. But when we have a culture, where there's a lot of collaboration, where there's a lot of support, where I know if I'm having a tough moment with a client or with a student, I can tap out and you can tap in. Like I feel supported, I feel connected. So really thinking about what your current culture is like in your office or in your department, talking with your team about what they would like to see as part of that culture, and then being very intentional about what we promote and what we permit is critical to like really creating that culture that is going to support compassion resilience as opposed to compassion fatigue. I was just saying that. By the way, that quote is from a book by Dr. Sean Ginwright. Some of us have had the opportunity to hear him speak through Resilient Lehigh Valley and or other resources, but his latest book, 4 Pivots, is really powerful and I think helpful to talking about how do we build a culture within our organizations that is mindful of building compassion resilience and not just saying, hey, staff, it's your responsibility to self-care. Like as organizations, we have a responsibility to protect and to build and to promote the wellness and the compassion resilience of our staff. So Beth talked about compassion resilience in the beginning, and she kind of gave us the illustration of this compass that none of us created, but it's really, really helpful to kind of think of how we can promote and protect and practice wellness from within those 4 different domains. So when we're looking at that heart part of the wellness compass, it has 2 different areas of our lives that we can reflect on. And we actually have a tool that we're going to make available to folks. It's like a self-assessment. I found it really helpful because in some ways I knew where I was going to score high and where I was going to score low. But in other ways, I was kind of surprised. And by taking it, it helped me decide on where I want to focus in terms of my own practices, right? To build my own compassion resilience. But when we're talking about that heart domain, we're talking about relationships. And so that's our ability to connect, as we heard Sherry say earlier, with others in really healthy and meaningful ways. So some of the types of questions on the survey around relationships are, am I prioritizing spending time with others whose company I enjoy? Do I ask for help when I need it? Some of us do not like to ask for help, right? That we don't want to look incompetent. We want people to have confidence in us. We don't want to be vulnerable, but we need to ask for help, right? When we need that help. So those are sample questions for relationships. And when we're talking about its emotions, it's the ability to express our emotions and to receive others' emotions in a healthy way. So we're talking about self-regulation. Brene Brown's agency, they do research with all the different organizations and people that they train. And in her new book, Atlas of the Heart, they looked at all the data where they asked people to identify emotions that they can recognize. And do you know that, like, by and large, on average, people can recognize 3 emotions? But we know as humans, like, we experience literally hundreds of emotions. But the ones we most frequently recognize are mad, sad, and glad. So, being able to reflect and to tune into what we're feeling and name that feeling and be able to express it in a healthy way is a huge part of promoting our wellness. And being able to listen to and identify the feelings of others is also really important. So sample questions might be, I give myself affirmations, I praise myself, I find things that make me laugh. So those are some actions we can take to promote our emotional wellness. When we talk about mind, there's 2 domains there. It's school and work. So like really getting the most out of what we're doing with our lives, our work lives or our school lives. And organization, which is the ability to manage time, priorities, money, and belongings. So sample questions in those domains might be, I take a break during the workday. Beth, that one's for you. Organization. Keep track of how I spend money and prioritizing how I spend my time. Spirit doesn't necessarily mean faith, but it can, right? So when we talk about our core values, like the development of a personal value system that supports your meaning or your purpose in life. So being aware of the non-material aspect of life that I value, reading books or listening to talks or music that inspire me are examples of practices we can take in that domain. When we're talking about rest and play, those are the things that we do to kind of balance work and play to renew ourselves. So some examples of that might be taking a vacation, taking your paid time off and like literally taking it off, not being connected to our phones or to our emails, meditating. And then in that last domain, that's more about our physical health, our physical resilience, right? So we have a stress resilience, which is the ability to deal positively with the challenges in life. So that one is like having my own personal support, being able to say no when I need to say no, and then care for the body, which is the ability to build healthy habits around our physical well-being and to end unhealthy habits. So examples might be getting enough sleep, eating regularly and nutritious foods, and getting regular preventive medical care. All right, we're at time, Beth. So I'm kicking it to you to wrap us up.
Thanks, Carla. And do want to be honoring everybody's time. So hope you enjoyed today's training. Sorry again for the technological issues. We're going to send you via email all the resources we talked about. including to the link to the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, which again is free. And we encourage you to join us for any of our upcoming trainings and opportunities. July 20th, we're hosting a virtual training on understanding historical and racial trauma. In September, we're having a part 1 and part 2 training on restorative practices. And as I mentioned before, August, and it'll be like a Tuesday, Thursday, half day, 3-4 hours on a Tuesday and a Thursday is what we're thinking. We're inviting teams, 3 to 5 member teams from helping schools or agencies attend and really have a much more in-depth train the trainer session on everything, all the goodness that is built inside this Compassion Resilience Toolkit, including talking through ways to operationalize this and really build compassion resilience practices into your school or agency culture. So that will be a free Train the Trainer series again this August. You'll get an invitation for that as well. So you can start having some conversations with your colleagues in your school or agencies, and hope to see you at one of those. And last slide, welcome to the Resilient Lehigh Valley family. Check out our website, follow us on Facebook or Twitter at Resilient Lehigh Valley or Resilient LV. Check out the website and sign up for our digital newsletter that's quarterly. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, Beth T at UnitedWayGLV.org. Happy to answer any questions. We also have some action teams that meet monthly on community outreach, data impact, also training and professional development that are open for any member of the community to join. So lots of different ways to get involved, and hope you help join the movement to build hope and healing and resilience in our community through trauma-informed and culture-responsive practices. So thank you for joining us today. Sorry we're a little bit over time, and again, sorry for the technological challenges. And thank you, a huge thank you to Carla, who's an amazing trainer, and Shauna, whose voice will return, and I'll be Carla and Shauna again leading the Train the Trainer session. And thank you to Sherry and Crayola for sponsoring this and the Train the Trainer session in August. And Sherry will be back with us again in August to help with that Train the Trainer too. So thank you so much. I hope you can all begin fostering your own compassion resilience and sharing these resources with your peers and colleagues. Thank you.